So we really try to do hey, we're not going to be the hypiest. We're bad at spicy takes. But like we're going to
Yeah.
try to do some signal in the noise. That's kind of at least our intent. I don't know if we always hit the mark, but that's what we try to do.
I mean, it all seems credible. I mean, it seems like it's more like research and data driven than just like, hey, here's what we're thinking, or this is like kind of our flavor of the month.
Yeah,
So,
well, we started. This is a newer thing for us. I've always loved original research because I feel like it is high signal that stands out. But now, if you think about content creation, it's so easy to just do. I mean, hot takes, but also how tos, and like there's so many formats that I feel like are saturated. So it's like, how do you stand out? You feed the market with new talking points. So that's been the last 6 months that we've been doing this, and man, it's crazy how much you can repurpose it. Like you can put it in slide decks, you can talk about it on webinars. Like it's really fun and so much more fun than doing like a what is AEO blog post or something.
I know, I know. No, it's good stuff. And like, thankfully, I feel like we're in like this evolution curve where people they know what AEO is, they see the value of it. They're using Google and ChatGPT, where like they know how the search results are changing. So it's less about like a what is it and like how do you actually show up more. So it's more of the
Yeah,
action orient, which I think is great to kind of be finally at that point where it's less about like a what is this and why does it matter, and more about how do we actually action on
that's
it.
why, yeah, your solution is so smart because I always found the owned content is fairly within the grasp of the previous paradigm. It's like we're going to create pages that target a term. You can call it a keyword or a prompt or whatever you want. But then the off page, it was like previously backlinks, and then I think it was Brittany Mueller said the brand mentions are the new backlinks phrase. But you say you see that phrase and you look at the citation data and you're like, how the hell do I get a brand mention? It's like
I
harder
know
than
there's
just saying, hey, go get some brand awareness. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. We can talk more about it. Jason, sorry for kind of like kicking this off without
No, that's
a
why I started
formal.
recording, just, in case you guys say anything smart before we get this kicked off.
That's my
In case it
strategy with
gets,
the pod too. Is like always press record. We can always cut
Yeah.
stuff out. It's like you don't want to
Yeah.
waste any tape. Yeah.
yeah,
Yep.
no,
Yep.
absolutely. I mean, I will say that like Josh and I and Jason, we kind of like backed into this. Like none of us have a strong like SEO background. I mean, I didn't know anything about it. Josh, I think, just has a good, computer like engineering background, and Jason, just from a marketing perspective, understood SEO. But I feel like none of us really knew what we were getting into 6 months ago. And
Hmm.
I think our goal was just like, we see that this is how people are going to buy. We're seeing that there are answers instead of links. And a lot of those answers are based off of what other people say about you and not what's on your website. And
Hmm.
so going into this, like going into like the Noble pivot about 6 months ago, like I didn't even know you could update like an article on the website. I had no idea like how to reach out to these publishers, and the biggest assumption was if you got mentioned in these sources, would that impact your overall visibility? So we had like a number of assumptions that like we had no idea if we could validate, but like luckily 6 months later, like we have seen that we've been able to validate them like one at a time, and we're in a pretty good position today. But it's definitely not easy, but at least this idea around like, well, if showing up in the answer is more important than the citation, how do you actually show up in the answer? And does that like can you achieve that through these brand mentions? So long way of saying like we didn't know what we were getting into 6 months ago, but like now we're very fortunate that we took the leap, took the jump, and things are working out.
Yeah, that's super cool.
Yeah. So a couple of quick things. Josh, all I can hear is your nanny. So if you want to just mute yourself while you're not talking, that would be
I don't
great.
even I don't even hear her.
Oh,
That's
that's
crazy.
amazing. Then your headphones work really well. But yeah, it's a Blues Clues episode, basically, is what we're dealing with here. So yeah. And then we're using Descript, which is the first time I've used it to actually record stuff. I usually like use Riverside, but we're trying this out. So don't worry about the quality you see. It's all recording locally. So just like Riverside, it will pop it back up. But I'm already kind of noticing some lags in it. So I'm like, I don't know. Hopefully Descript will work well, but they might have the same infrastructure that Riverside does. So I guess we'll find out. But so yeah, that's basically it. Just because we'll post the full episode on YouTube or something, we'll kind of start like as if we were doing a live webinar. We'll just kind of do little intros, go around, do intros, quick intros, and then I'll frame kind of each section of the conversation. Then, we can, it's pretty much free form, but I might call people out specifically on certain things. But then just kind of feel free to go around and just add your comments or interrupt or whatever. We'll just have a conversation, really. Sound good?
Sounds
Sounds
good.
great.
Cool, cool. All right. Well, let me pull up my notes. I've got them here. All right. So I guess I didn't even think about like the framing of the whole thing. I just kind of put together the comments or the questions based on this. But I guess generally, we just really want to talk about AI, AI search in general and some of the findings that we've seen across both, Alex, some of the research that you've done, some of the data we've just seen by running this for some of our own clients, and just kind of go back and forth a little bit on that and help educate people in the market a little bit more about how these LLMs are working when it comes to search. I know we'll talk about parts of the funnel and where things show up. Alex, I read your articles and your research, so I think that will help feed into it. But yeah, we'll just kind of start from there. So if we want to, maybe we'll start with Alex. You want to introduce yourself and say a little bit about your company, and then we'll go to Rahul, Josh, and then I'll round it up and get started.
Sounds good. The intro is always my most awkward part, but yeah, I'm Alex. I run Omniscient Digital with two co-founders, David and Ali. We're about 30 to 35 employees. We build revenue-focused organic growth systems for B2B companies. So those, systems are optimized for classic search and Gen AI. We operate, from an SEO strategy, AEO strategy perspective, but also offer, execution on editorial and creative, so content production, various sorts, and then off-page and digital PR as well, all wrapped up in sort of analytics and attribution. My background is kind of in growth marketing, so very, very general, try to find a new 0 to 1 scalable traction channel, test it out, scale it, and then kind of go on to the next one, and also experimentation. Thus, Jason, how I know PEP from way back in the day.
Nice, nice. All right, Rahul, you want to go next?
My name is Rahul Jain. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Noble. Noble helps companies get mentioned in the sources that LLMs cite, so they appear in the answers that their prospects read. Prior to starting Noble, I've had the sales roles at various B2B companies. And we've been around for about 6 months, and we've helped companies like Ramp, ZoomInfo, Zendesk, Webflow increase their AI search visibility. And so we have some good data points and case studies to show.
And Josh,
Cool. And how's my sound?
you sound great.
No, my background noise.
Who knows? They'll hear anything.
Okay, maybe it's because I'm actually talking, so that's good. Yeah, I'm Josh. I am Rahul's co-founder, CTO. I've been working on the tech side of startups since graduating from college. Started a healthcare company where I met Rahul. Obviously, I was in health IT. Sold that in 2020. I got tired of working for the company that bought us because it was a much bigger company. They're a great company, just got tired of it and decided to start something new. Wanted to see the flywheel of growth that you can't really get in healthcare. And so finally experiencing it, which is great.
Nice. And I guess I'll wrap it up, even though it doesn't really matter who I am here. I don't have much to add to the conversation. Actually, I probably will. We'll see. I would like to hear myself talk sometimes. I'm Jason Widup. I am a CMO for B2B technology startups. I've been in B2B marketing for about 25 years now and have worked in all shapes and sizes of companies, from as big as Microsoft all the way down to pre-revenue startups and everything in between, agencies, consultancies, you name it. And I've been working with Noble for the entire time, and it's been just a great ride, and loving seeing kind of what we're able to do for a lot of great customers that I've either worked with in the past or have wanted to work with. And it's always nice to be able to see results that actually are easy to show. And so that's been great. So cool. All right, let's get into it. So let's start with just maybe an easy one. So obviously, we know that AI search is really changing and affecting how buyers discover, evaluate, probably even purchase software here pretty soon. And so we've got, data both from the Noble side, and Alex has data from a lot of research that he and his team have been doing. So with that, what's the single biggest misconception you see from marketing leaders about showing up in AI search? Alex, do you want to kick us off with that one?
Yeah, I can try. I think there's a few different misconceptions, and if I can simplify them on a spectrum, like there's one extreme that kind of says this is a nothing burger, everything's the same. You can just do the same SEO work, and then there's always like this addendum that's like, and also brand, and also that matters too, and also off page, right? It's kind of an aside. But that's obviously a huge point because that typically wasn't under the purview of traditional SEO. And then I think the other side of that spectrum is coming from, maybe less of a background with like the past decade of SEO, and it's sort of everything is new. Like I'm de-investing in SEO and I'm allocating everything towards AEO. And then, the ingredients look similar. You're still publishing content, maybe different forms. You're still getting off-page, trust and verification through, links or brand mentions. So it's and sometimes on that far end of everything is new, like there's certain spammy tactics that I'm seeing, and those probably will get washed away over time. But like most things, I would say the real truth probably lies somewhere in the middle of the two extremes.
Yeah, Rahul, what do you think?
I would say the biggest misconception is that kind of two things. One is that your website is the holy grail. I think, to Alex's point, like people are focusing on optimizing their website, but there's so much of AEO that is just traditional SEO. But a big part of what's different is the importance of, as Alex puts it, off page or off site, and making sure that other people or companies or authors or publishers are mentioning you and your brand. And specifically, if people are referencing offsite, they just say Reddit or they just say Wikipedia. They just say like one of these publishers versus understanding that, even Reddit, even though it may show up, as one of the top domains, it might be less than 5% of all citations for the prompts you care about. So there's a huge long tail of third-party sources that are being cited that don't fall under the Reddit, Wikipedia, Quora banner of like these are the big name sources that are being cited. Like even now people are talking about LinkedIn. And so even if you add LinkedIn to that, all of these bigger brands might still be less than 10% of all of the total sources cited. So there's a huge long tail that's out there that I think people don't recognize, mostly because they don't know how to attack it.
Can I add to that? It's not really a misconception, but it does touch on one of my mild pet peeves, which is like there's not a playbook for this stuff. So like we're relying on data, and hopefully ours provides some signal in the noise, but ultimately like there's always some bias in the data, and you see these studies where it's like Reddit is the top citation source, and to your point, like now LinkedIn, and there's sort of this rapid pivoting and whiplash where it's like, oh, we all have to move from Reddit to LinkedIn now. And it's like the real answer is to look at your data and realize that, hey, Reddit's probably the top citation source broadly because it's a massive website with tentacles into every topic in the world. And if you just aggregate that up, like it's probably going to be a top citation source. But for your B2B software company, your AI CRM or whatever, like is Reddit the top 10? Is it the top 20? Well, there's 19 others within that too. But yeah, this general sort of flocking to like whatever the newest data point says, I'm like, all right, this is counterproductive.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah. I'll add one thing here. So I work with a lot of different companies, and I'd say one of the things that, and this even kind of got me, is if you follow a lot of the platforms that have spun up in the AI visibility space, it's all about how do you change the content on your site. And I think because those platforms focused on that, I think it drove maybe a misconception that that's what really mattered the most. So, well, if these platforms are telling me to focus on my on-site, my owned content, then that must be the thing that's going to drive the visibility changes. And but without actually, I didn't even know until we started to figure this out at Noble that like, oh, actually, yeah, that's definitely a part of the story, an important part of the story. You got to get that right. But it's definitely not the whole story. And what we'll get into next is, and part of it depends on what part of the funnel that somebody is searching in and where they are in, if they're looking for a product or if they have a problem they're trying to solve. I mean, I guess a lot of AI searches are related to like a problem you want to solve in some way. Then you're starting to get into the different funnel spaces. But before we move there, Josh, anything to add in terms of like, you've talked to a lot of our customers, a lot of prospects, and a lot of people in the industry. What's a misconception you've heard?
Yeah, I mean, I think the big one is just tied to the whole gotcha, and I think you guys called it out, tied to the whole gotcha that like it all is all just SEO, and that there's I think there's this fake boogeyman that's like the AEO bro that thinks that like everything is different. I actually don't think really I think initially maybe there was a small subset of people that were just getting super excited about it. I just don't think anybody thinks that. I think like why would you not make the argument that it's fundamentally the same as a field that tons of people have done, but also some new things? Like that's just good politics to frame it that way. So like, I don't really think there's a villain here. I think it's just like everybody kind of thinks the same thing, and the rest makes for good content. But yeah, to me, the misconception is that it's all one thing or all another thing. It's just like mostly the old thing, but the math is different, and we shouldn't ignore that. That's really all it comes down to, in my opinion.
Nice.
I actually have another one as we're talking through this. This may not be a misconception, but I think it's just poor attribution. How everybody likes to say that only 2% of website traffic are from LLMs, when in reality, you have the Google AI overview showing up in up to like half of searches, and there's very little connection back from what you see in the AI overview to actually clicking on something in the AI overview. Like most people open up a separate tab and just search for that product or that brand. And so I think today people want a very clean like traffic funnel from search to getting to your website and then booking a demo. And I just don't think that exists today. I think it will exist when people can book a demo directly from the LLM. But one thing that's really frustrating is people try to deprioritize or they try to lessen the importance of the LLMs by citing that 2% figure, but it doesn't properly like account for the poor attribution or the lack of attribution in the system today.
I'll even add to that. I agree with you entirely. And you can see that if you just set up self-reported attribution versus your click-based telemetry. And for us, I don't know if it's like 5 or 10% of our traffic and leads are LLM attributed via clicks, but our self-reported says 50 to 70%. So it's like a massive delta, right? But back to my background in sort of experimentation and conversion rate optimization, it's actually just a numerator and denominator problem, because the other side will say, oh, but the traffic converts at 40%. And you're like, well, like fewer people are hitting the website, so the conversion rate's going to be higher. So it's just like how you're calculating that equation, because obviously like many, many more people are seeing your brand that aren't clicking on it, but then the few that do, it's like a smaller ratio,
Yeah.
Totally.
Nice. All right, cool. Let's talk about funnel stages. So we'll start with the top of the funnel. So here's where I think we've got maybe, I don't know, maybe some differences of opinion or thought here. I don't know. So Rahul, your take is brands don't really show up here, but I think Alex, your research might, found that they sometimes do. And so maybe these are the same things, but Rahul, maybe you can start when you're talking about top of funnel, let's first define it. I mean, and I think also it kind of maps Alex with your is it start with problem aware? Problem.
one of
No, I
those
can't
funnel
remember.
frameworks. Problem unaware, problem aware. I don't know.
Oh yeah, problem unaware,
Top,
aware,
middle,
and then
bottom,
solution,
yeah.
solution aware, top, middle, bottom of funnel. But we'll start
Yeah.
at the top. So where people don't know brand, and sometimes they just kind of know they have a problem, and sometimes they don't even know they have a problem. They might just describe something that they're seeing. Up there, brands don't show up as much, and that was kind of cited in your research, I think, as well, Alex. But Rahul, what's your thoughts on the top of funnel and how it relates to AI search?
Yeah, my understanding, and I'd love to be wrong on this, is that if somebody is searching top of funnel, so let's just use CRM as a category. So if somebody is searching like, why do I need a CRM, or like, what is a CRM good for, or they're trying to understand kind of what that category is or general information about it. That's where the LLMs will answer the question, present information, but they won't be recommending brands or potential like vendors or products to the user. And that was our understanding for top of funnel. And Alex, I would love to learn more about the research you've done. And I'd actually love to be wrong, because if we do start to see brands recommended in that top of funnel search, then I think it also just opens up the category to try to influence buyers even sooner in the funnel than I anticipated. But that was my understanding with top of funnel searches.
Yeah, I think we're actually ideologically aligned. Even before AI search, we typically avoided doing top of the funnel content, given that it was simply not high intent and it usually didn't tie back to any significant conversion rate. And you're going to see obviously a higher percentage of brands recommended when somebody's asking for a set of solutions, right? If I want to replace my CRM, I'm looking for HubSpot alternatives. Like it's going to give you those most associated with HubSpot as an alternative. What we've found, though, is that in certain categories, when somebody's wrapping their head around the category, and this is a very small percentage of the time, the models will often use very well-known solutions in that space as sort of metonyms or categorical associations. So this could happen I think it's probably less apparent if a category is very well known and very consensus, but imagine like a sort of emerging category. Like a We have a client that does sort of data contracts, and if you ask like what is a data contract, it'll give you the definition and then say, products like this help implement data contracts. More so, what we call, I think it's problem aware. Again, I should understand the funnel stages. So when somebody's like actually asking for like, how do I do something? I actually have an example from my own life, which is my oven was smoking and I tried to fix it. I couldn't figure it out. So I'm like, my oven's smoking. How do I figure this out? Right? Pain point. It gave me a step-by-step, start here, go here, step 3, try this. And, step 3 was use oven cleaner. And this is a specific brand you can try. So it's not as high of a percentage, but I feel like the middle, especially the middle of the funnel, is quite neglected. Like I wouldn't recommend brands go out and do all the ultimate guides and top of the funnel informational pieces. I think like if you're very at the high end of kind of the maturity curve in terms of like you're, past the growth stage, you're an enterprise, you're trying to kind of build a defensive moat around how you're associated with the category and problem set, it's warranted resource wise. For a startup, I'm almost always going to recommend you focus where somebody's comparing solutions, where somebody is looking for an alternative, where they've got a deep pressing pain point that they're trying to solve, just because it's higher temperature.
Yeah, that makes sense. Especially if you're framing for your oven example, where it was not just like, why do I need to remove the smoke from my oven? But it's more along the lines of like the process, or like what should I be doing because my oven is smoking. Then it makes sense like for that type of prompt that at some point it recommends an action, which might be a purchase associated with it. So that makes sense for that type of prompt.
I think for those, you also have you have to have such like categorical ubiquity, like and some of this is maybe effectuated through AI search optimization work, but I think some of that stuff is ultimately the hand wavy. It's just a really well known brand that gets wrapped into these things, and it's like there's not a ton you can do in the next 3 to 6 months to get your brand associated with this problem. That's like a very sort of long term, top of Maslow's hierarchy play.
Nice. Josh, anything to jam in on the top of funnel?
No, I think these two guys covered it. I do, I think we probably get into it a bit when we talk about lists versus non-lists, because everybody likes to over-index on lists. I wrote about this. I'm not going to plug myself, but I will say that I think showing up in a non-list as an example is probably the most powerful thing. As a branded example, is probably the most powerful thing that you can accomplish when it comes to presence. And so I think the companies.
You say a non-list?
A non-list, but as an example. So yeah, like it's like this is the state of the industry, and then you're like, for example, like that's super powerful because the sky's the limit in terms of how high up the funnel you can show up. So yeah, so I think that's kind of what I'm seeing when it comes to where brands can show up in the funnel.
That's an interesting point. I don't know if I can prove this. I don't even know how I would structure a study to do this, but I actually feel like the top of the funnel might be, well, it's changing, right? You get quick answers. The friction is basically zero to getting an answer to your question. Even 5 years ago with featured snippets, it was very easy. But for myself, in B2B spaces at least, I'm often looking for data related to a problem, and not to like hammer the original research thing too much, but that's where you do start to, on your own website, have the source material that gets cited on deep research queries. If a CMO is trying to wrap their head around like, hey, what are AI overviews doing to traffic? And it cites Kevin Indig's research. Now I know Kevin Indig. But then you can also take that, syndicate it, do outreach, and get mentioned all over the place, again, as an example. And I think that's where, again, this is theory, but maybe that's the new top of the funnel as opposed to the old ultimate guide to SaaS SEO or something.
Nice. Cool. Let's move to the middle of the funnel. So, Rahul, we've seen a stat, I don't know, it's 85, 95% of mid-funnel searches basically kind of are using third-party sources or citing third-party sources. Alex, does your research kind of validate that? What are you seeing in the research there and the research that you were able to do on mid-funnel searches? How important are offsite versus onsite mentions?
I should have reviewed the
Should we also
numbers.
define mid-funnel just to make sure we're talking about the same thing? So I think when we think about mid-funnel, we think about the like what is the best X product in Y industry. So that's how we're defining mid funnel, where it's like almost like what are the products in that consideration set, and then bottom of funnel is also like the would then be the how like how does X product work, or like what's X product versus Y product. So let just wanted to kind of add
No,
that
it's good to do
category.
definitions. That's actually a really good point because we'll often use middle of the funnel to be one layer above knowing the category name or asking for a best list of solutions. But I think the point stands either way. I don't have the data in front of me with regards to the research we've done, whether it's 70, 80, or 90%. I think directionally it's just most of the citation sources are off page. And there's obviously nuance to that, like, different audits that I do, different industries, different companies, like, we get the occasional company who's just been really good at SEO for the past 10 years and their citation share is like very high. It's still not like above 50%. Like they're still like off page. So whatever the number is, it's like the point is like many of the influential sources are not your website.
Yeah, makes sense. And then bottom of funnel. So bottom of funnel. So this is, I think, well, again, definitionally, I think bottom of funnel now, it's like you're either asking for, like Rahul said, how does this specific product fit into my stack or into like the problem that I'm trying to solve? Alex, would you define it the same way, kind of the bottom of funnel, or yeah, I guess your solution aware, maybe you're comparing products too at this
Product
level
aware, brand
too.
aware. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
How is like
Like we
product
could look at it
A
as like a
different than
branded
product
query.
B?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So either mentioning one brand or multiple brands. And at this point, I mean, I would think that now it starts to kind of come back to a little on pay, your own site content because it's going to get some features and some information and maybe some case study and some stats from that. But yeah, what is your data? What does your data show, Alex?
So we were surprised. This was research we did specifically on branded queries. So HubSpot reviews, HubSpot versus Salesforce. Does HubSpot integrate with Mailchimp? All of those HubSpot pricing, all in aggregate. I think I don't have the data in front of me. It was like 75% were off page. So it was still a significant percentage, like 70 or 75%. And some block of that was competitor sites. So them doing the sort of, alternatives page or versus page. Many were independent media or third party publications that weren't competitors or weren't, selling a product. Many were review sites. So I think there's a case to be made for the sort of trust and verification layer. I actually expect that to increase over time. But regardless, some of those you can't really do much about if it's a direct competitor writing about you, other than send a cease and desist, I guess, if it's inaccurate. That's where I think you need really good product marketing. And that's actually where SEO and AEO from an on-page perspective differ quite a bit. Because now you're looking into your documentation pages, you're looking into, who are you for? Like, how are you speaking to, your persona fit? How are you speaking towards your integrations? Do you have an integrations library? How is all of this linked and findable on your website? Because it does, I believe that the models want to find, precise and accurate information. And even if it's off page, like a lot of the companies reviewing you are going to take information that is present on your website to then do those reviews so they don't get the cease and desist. And, so they're playing by the rules to a certain extent. So, regardless of their percentage, that's where I think your product marketing and your on page information is still critically important.
Yeah, definitely. I'm surprised by how many, to use your language, like off-page citations there are, because I think kind of falsely assumed that once you get down to that bottom of funnel search, it's primarily going to be on-site optimization and having the brand actually talking about their own product and their own services, describing it, answering those frequently asked questions. And the fact that there's still such a high volume, if not the majority of sources being off-site or off-page, really says that also like brands just can't even necessarily control the narrative around what is being shown when prospects are searching for like their brand specifically in these LLMs, which is really surprising.
Yeah, I hope that it changes actually. Like I think there's actually I don't want to go too into detail here, but I feel like there's some black hat loopholes based on that. Like I think it probably should pull from your website if possible at that stage. If somebody's asking about you. The fact that so many competitor sites showed up was actually surprising to me.
Yeah, I think one of the things I would think is probably some of it depends on just how much write up of your product there is in third party sources, right? So like the HubSpot Salesforce comparison, it's like, okay, yeah, they're everywhere. But if I'm talking like a niche category and there's just not a lot of offsite stuff available for you, but somebody's asking about your brand, then my guess is the LLMs would have no choice but to get a lot of the content from your site. So I think it probably there's an inflection point at some point where you're written about enough and you have enough off-page stuff. But before that point, it can only reference that and maybe like anything else it can grab from like a Reddit post or a G2 review or, something like that. I would guess that would probably shift as as you get larger.
That's a really good point, especially for early stage startups. But I do think it's warranted just from a few case examples that I've seen to at that stage bolster your off-page presence in any way that you can easily. I want to say, like, so if you don't have the G2 profiles, if you, for us, like if you don't have the clutch profile, like I think you should, because if all you have is your website, it's fairly easy for a competitor to come in and write a review or a versus page that then they're obviously going to weave in their product marketing angle, and now you've got like two buckets of sources, and one is your website and one is your direct antagonistic competitor, and the model is gonna take both of those and try to parse out what the right answer is. So I still think you want to bolster that presence, to the best of your ability.
Sense. Josh, anything to add on this one?
On the funnel section. Yeah, I was
Yeah.
actually also surprised by Alex, your research around how many sources can impact bottom of funnel. It's good for us, obviously, so it's a bit self-serving. But when for a specific example, very tangible example, when clients ask about prompts and I see them uploading like, you know, us versus another brand, and there's just like 30 of them, I almost want to tell them those are kind of like wasted. But then randomly you'll maybe get, and to your point, like some of these review sites, and there's a lot of them. It's not just that we think of like 3 or 4, but there's hundreds that do show up. You might get like one versus the other, not including our client, and you can actually include your client. So it's like a three-way versus, or they spin up a new article that's a head-to-head, and so it actually is pretty valuable. Your research does make sense. I just wouldn't have thought. I kind of took that for granted. So happy to see it. I still think mid funnel or top funnel is better for Noble, but it's good to know and to be corroborated by your research that even bottom of funnel, like you can look off site and it doesn't just have to be your competitor. You can get these from a lot of places.
Good point on the prompt tracking too. We used to have like keyword databases, and we all kind of use the same data. And now like if you see somebody's visibility increase or something like that, you're like, did you just type in best B2B SEO agency with a founder who lives in New York and has a dog named Biscuit? Because Omniscient's going to come up 100% of the time for that. So we do recommend with certain brands, especially the larger ones who care about perception, not just visibility, to track some of those branded prompts, especially with regards to functionality, like the integrations and the pricing. And when they're in that, they're thinking about purchasing stage, but we parse that out when we look at the visibility data, because we're not trying to move the needle from like 95 to 100% there. So we'll kind of exclude that from the broader, discovery and visibility phases.
Yeah, makes sense. Cool. All right, let's switch to kind of like what types of content are actually getting cited. And so, Alex, I'll go back to your research. I thought it was interesting around I'm looking at the pie chart you have now, which nobody can see, of course, but when a user mentions a brand by name in their query, earned media sources account for half of the citations, which I thought was interesting. And then commercial content or commercial brand content, which is basically like non-directory, non-review, non-editorial sites, still show up. So 48% are from earned media sources, so things like forum, social media, editorial content, review, directory sites. 30% are commercial brand content. So I thought that was kind of interesting. So these are the different types of sites and content that the LLMs are citing for specific brand searches. And then your site alone is only about 23% of that. So what are what are the takeaways from this? What do people need to be thinking about? And like, why is this interesting?
Do you know if that was the branded query study or
Yeah, this
which
is the
study that
branded
was?
one. Yep. The
Oh,
branded
okay, cool.
prompts. Yeah.
Well, I don't know. In my eyes, you still have to look at it on an individual basis. Like I'm saying grain of salt with our own research because we're looking at several different prompts and several different brands, right? And also, like, what is your focus area? Like, is it on the branded prompts and those queries? Because that would be more of a, let's move the needle on our sentiment as opposed to, our visibility. So I think it's like a strategic question of what your goal is. Because if you move up the funnel, those proportions are going to change, and what you can do. So it's also like, yeah, the citations are this, but like, can I action on this? And that's where I think you get into the brand mentions, the outreach. Is there a website that is willing to put you on it versus like, do you have to pay to play, or is it just cemented? Is it a competitor site that's simply not going to add you? If it's a product page that shows up, they're not going to add you on the product page. So it's like, take your data, and these studies can help you think through like what you should be tracking, or generally what teams need to be involved. But I think you need to look at like your individual situation and then think about like what you can effectuate and then what the impact of that would be. Again, if you have zero content on your site and you're doing quite well off page, publish some more content. If the opposite is true, if you got 1,000, 2,000 pages live and zero off page presence, which is, by the way, the more common problem that we see when we do audits, figure out what off page sources make sense. And maybe it is Reddit, maybe it's review sites, maybe it's off page listicles. But I think you have to do that stack ranking and analysis, and figure it out, like, what, like, can you go and do you have a Reddit playbook, like, versus like a listicle is like, all right, I know how to do outreach and like, negotiate, but like, I don't know how to do Reddit, speaking personally right now.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things that I think about is if I'm promoting my product, like a lot of my competitors are probably going to have a top 10 software, in this category, and they're going to be number one. But they still need to have 9 other products in there in that list. And so I think it becomes kind of like, you don't think about it, but like, can I reach out to my own competitor? Like, and ask them to put, if I'm not in there, can I ask them to put my brand in that article? It starts to become kind of interesting. And then maybe if you've got the same top 10 where you're at the top of the list, maybe you guys can exchange and like get them on, I could get on mine. But I think that's where, when you talk about actioning something and trying to get your brand mentioned in these things, that's where you can start to get to question like, I'm not showing up here. I think I should be on here, but it's my competitor. How do I address that? Yeah.
The old frenemy playbook. Yeah. And then you
Yeah.
can pick and choose which competitors you want to have friendly relationships with. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'd love to see Forum as like for every category, you get like 10 companies that just like bind together and say like, hey, we're gonna work together. We're always gonna show up. Everybody who's not like part of this like 10, brand frenemy group, we'll kind of edge them out, but everybody else is included. Like, I kind of feel like that's the direction that we're going, especially because the order that those brands show up in the search changes. It's just a matter of like, are you even showing up? Period. So,
I was just thinking
that's
how
just
funny it would be, like, because you'd probably want to position against like the big player in your space. So number 2 through 10, they all band together, and number 1 just gets left out of the group chat, and they're like, I want to be on these lists. What's going on?
Nice. Yep. Yep. Cool. Also, I forgot what I was going to say. I had an interesting point, and now it just kind of left me. So we'll move on. Let's see. So, Josh, actually, here's one for you. When you look at where brands are missing in practice, what are some of the most common gaps that you're seeing? So, like, let's say you're running Noble for a client and you get a bunch of these. What are the biggest gaps that sometimes there might be surprising, like the types of content sites or the types of sites or the types of content that the LLMs are referencing, but they're just not in? Anything surprising that you see there?
Yeah, surprising around where I think surprising. So I get surprised, like whenever a big brand comes to us, like a really big brand, and you think of like a company like Navan, which is ubiquitous with travel and expense, basically, right? And so I'm always worried, like, well, are there going to be any gaps for them? Because probably everyone is thinking of them. Every list is going to have them somewhere on there. I think like, yeah, so there's 2 things. I do think that there's always these industry roundups that aren't really branded, and there's always opportunities for brands there. So that's less surprising, more of just a general strategy around companies like that. But I do actually think that there's some of these blogs or listicles that are meant to basically highlight small players, not necessarily to penalize the big player, but just because it's a play. It's almost like a play, so that the big player eventually reaches out. and gets in them. And I've seen this a lot where it's like, yeah, I mean, all of the brand specific ones for that industry are going to be mentioning Nevada at some point. But if you look at some of the travel and expense, kind of like these career listicle publishers that are especially in like OUS, overseas, that are really just trying to like kind of game the system, you will always see that big player missing. So it's a good segue from the last point, right? And so that surprised me. Like there are a ton of opportunities in cited articles. Maybe they wouldn't have been cited in the top 10 of the traditional SERP style rating, but that are getting cited in LLMs that are not mentioning the big players. And so I've been pleasantly surprised by that as well. So there's more opportunity than I had originally thought as a result of that.
Okay, I remember what I was gonna say. So one of the things I remember talking to you, Josh, and actually Rahul about this is like um, AI search is getting more personalized too. So you can take all of these prompts and you can run them through a visibility tool, but that visibility tool isn't Jane or John or whoever running the prompt and using all of that person's history and the memory that it has with you to basically inform the answer. So I guess my existential question is does any of this matter? So like if and how, I guess, what type of personality do these, when these visibility tools are running these prompts through the different LLMs, is it coming at it as if it was like, oh, this is the first prompt this user has ever done into this LLM, so I have no context, I have no memory? Josh, what are your thoughts on that part? I'm kind of curious, like what you think happens there.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it's specifically around, again, just to play back the question, personalization, and how is it even, does it even matter if like everyone gets a different response? Yes, I'm about to write about this because I think it's super interesting. I do think that there is a lot of variability, and I think there are definitionally an infinite number of answers that you will get, but just based on, all of machine learning works on distributions of data, and it's all the foundation of all of machine learning is probability. And I think we're for our purposes, we're talking about brand visibility, but any concept that is maybe a little more subjective, like brand visibility is subjective. If you ask an LLM, what are the biggest animals, you would hope that maybe it tells you in a different way depending on where you are in the world, but it gives you the right answer. For brand visibility, obviously something more subjective. That said, if you look at all the sources, there is a distribution. And maybe in certain geographies, there will be one brand that's dominant over the other. But if you kind of smashed all of those answers, you would see that the distribution is really right around like exactly which brands are the most popular, which ones tend to have the best reviews, which ones tend to have the best results. So I think it, again, like it was kind of, when you talk about that study, I think it was Rand Fishkin that did it, and it was looked at as, and he didn't frame it this way, but it was looked at as basically a gotcha by everyone in the SEO space. Like, well, who cares? Why are we even talking about this? Everyone's going to get a different answer. Don't even bother. It's all SEO. Sure, there's a million different answers, but if you look at the actual, and this is what the visibility trackers are good at, if you look at the aggregation, there is real signal there. And so to me, personalization is meaningful. And there's, I think, math behind where it goes from personalization to personalization at scale. But personalization at scale is really what you're looking at. And I do think it'll show you a good distribution of data where the dominant brands doing a good job of this show up.
Great answer. That's something I've
Thanks.
been pondering too, and I'd like to produce research on this. I'm just thinking through the methodology, but the personalization question, if you do N of one, I think you're never going to get an interesting answer, and I think the aggregate answer is the answer, right? Time tracking, over time series, or prompt tracking over time series with enough prompts to give you a representative picture. I think what's interesting would be to look at your visibility, your sentiment, and the citation sources across different dimensions. So if you're a company, let's say Omniscient, like we've got a couple products, right? We've got things we sell. Let's say SEO, AEO, digital PR, content. We have a couple people we sell to within companies. So we have like director, VP, CMO, and then we have a couple company stages and industries, right? So you're never going to get that N of one where you have all of the data in somebody's ChatGPT account and all of the memory and the personalization. But if we can approximate almost like a grid, like a table of those personas, and look at like, all right, what is our visibility for startup CMOs versus enterprise director of SEO for this product line? Then I think you can start to make actions based on that and say, well, as a company, strategically, we want to be well known in the enterprise, but currently, we're like our sentiment says we're best for small businesses. So how do we fix that? And then you can kind of look at the differences and citation sources and see what you can do. And then kind of the same playbook model applies. I think that would be really interesting, and I'd like to do that research. So still thinking about that. If you guys want to partner on that, that'd be a fun one.
Nice.
Yeah, definitely.
Cool. Okay, so let's get into what people should do to kind of bring us home here. So, if I'm a VP of marketing at a B2B tech company and I'm kind of like maybe learning this for the first time, what are a couple of things that I could do immediately and without too much effort to get started on this journey? Anyone feel free to take that one.
Alex, you're the expert. Why don't you go first?
Well, it depends where you're at, where you're starting from. So for you, the first thing you got to do is just like audit. If you're going through a fitness program, you got to run the mile and see how fast you are, something like that, or like how much weight you can lift to come up with a plan. So there, you can look at any of these, prompt tracking tools, even Ahrefs Brand Radar. Like you could just get a good, sample of where you're standing in relation to, like, I think don't even overthink it with what prompts. Just like think about your category entry points and your keywords and see if there's search volume, turn them into a question if you want, and then see what the biggest gaps are. So almost always there's going to be some level of owned content gaps. There's going to be a lot of off-page gaps. And then there's going to be creative experiments or marginal experiments on top of that. I wouldn't start typically Series B, like earlier stage company. I wouldn't start with the whole on-page AEO stuff. I think those are generally marginal. I haven't seen a ton of great case studies that, parse out the exogenous variables and say like this is why we got higher citation rate. And if you do, it's again, it's not going to show up in the data in a meaningful way. So I'm typically going to look at their on page and say, for this category, do you have a product page? Do you have a feature page? Do you have a use case page? Do you have the core website pages related to what you're selling? And then do you have some informational pages on it? Do you have a listicle? Do you have a how-to post? What are your core like 5 assets? And if you don't have those, create those. And then go into the off page and say, all right, like where am I present? Am I present on 1% or 20% or 50% of attainable mentions? And then see if you have friends, see if you know it. Like if you're in the industry for a while, typically you're going to know a couple editors or marketing leaders at some of these companies, and just shoot an outreach email and say, hey, here's what I'm trying to do. I think we can make a win-win here, and try to, raise your off-page profile as well.
Rahul, anything to add?
No, I mean, I think that's a great starting point. I think naturally what people do in the industry is they will start with the visibility tool to kind of get a baseline. And then I see people immediately go to the on-site optimization because they think, well, we own this website, like it's natural to start here. When Alex, to your point, like it might be better to focus more on the off-site optimization, especially if they want to show up not just like mid-funnel where we assume, but this is kind of across the funnel for all these search prompts. But I think it just goes back to like the foundation is still SEO. Like nothing has changed there. But if there's one thing that's probably the most helpful is in addition to classic SEO, it's the offsite optimization, which is just PR. And making sure that you're mentioned in these sources, in these third-party, citations that are coming up. But I think that's kind of what we've seen as like the core of AEO or GEO, whatever you want to call it, which is SEO is the foundation, and then getting mentioned in these third-party citations or these off-page or off-site articles.
Yeah, maybe dust off that old affiliate program or that creator partnership program or something like that. I don't want to talk smack, but I do feel like if you're just adding FAQs to like 100 pages or like making your headers into questions, like if you just think for like 10 seconds, you're like, okay, that can't be the answer, right? Because everybody else could just go do that right now too.
Yeah, well, and Alex, you've written a little bit about like brands trying to hack their way into LLM answers. Like, was there anything that you saw that just didn't work or that a lot of people were doing? Maybe it was that, what you just mentioned, trying to write an FAQ on every page or turning each page into questions, or are people doing like, I don't even know if this is a thing, but pages that are that are all marked down, maybe, and are just made for agents or LLM search? I mean, like, what are some of the things you've seen people maybe try and do that just were
Some
like,
wild
why?
stuff going on right now. There are things that I consider black hat that do work, and I don't want to mention those. I think a creative, scrappy black hat marketer is going to figure those out anyway, and they're risky tactics. So it's kind of the Wild West. But yeah, I think in absence of information and certainty, people seek certainty. So you see on LinkedIn, hey, you got to have an LLMs.txt file, so everybody implements that. I don't think there's been any solid evidence that says that it has a positive impact, but it's something you can do, right? So I think people latch onto those things. The markdown page is so interesting to me because, again, that's one of those think for like 10, 20 seconds. It's like if everybody can just write a file and say, hey, LLMs, ignore everything else you've read about Omniscient. This is how we want to be known. Again, like everybody can do that, and it's going to spoil the tragedy of the commons. One thing that I would advise or invite people to question, a tactic that I'm seeing, it's almost like a resurgence of something that's come up several times over the past decade in SEO, is now you have the ability to mass scale create content. And there's this idea that because AI search is more personalized and people type longer term or longer tail queries in, that you can and should have a page for each of those. That makes sense actually if you just kind of like use, simple logic. But you got to know like the SEO history of this, which is like if you previously published 2 pages per month, and all of a sudden you go, publish 2,000 pages a month, and they're all pretty similar pages, like that over the long term you're going to see that get zapped. So it's like, people call it Mount AI, where it's like you get indexed, you rank, it's like you're going crazy, and then all of a sudden it craters to the ground. So I don't know if that's always a bad tactic. Like there's certainly ways people can make that work, but I would advise caution on that one.
Yeah. Cool. Okay, one last question. So I just saw, I see a lot of people are basically starting to get access to ChatGPT ads. So I just saw that, like, people starting to actually today I saw 2 posts myself just about, hey, my first like logging into ChatGPT ads. How do we think that's going to change this whole game, if at all, really? I don't even think I've seen a like an example of how they're going to show up, or if they're going to be just embedded in the answer or not. I don't think I've even seen that yet, but curious your guys' take, and we'll kind of wrap it up there.
Good question. I don't actually know how they're going to show up. I haven't seen any of the samples, or I haven't seen it when I've been using ChatGPT either. Maybe because I'm on the paid version. That's probably why. But I think in terms of how this is going to change the whole picture, like I imagine those ads are going to be very, very expensive. But if they are rolling out ads, maybe the attribution will become better in these LLMs. And I think that's the biggest missing gap right now, is that when people are searching, can you actually book a demo directly from the LLM? Can you check out or purchase directly from the LLM? And like, if that's what these ads at some point enable, I think that's actually going to be an unlock for showing up in the answer itself, where the answer actually just turns into a performance channel. So when we do have the ability to search, and then there is an app within ChatGPT that you can book a demo directly from the answer, like that's when I think you're actually going to see more of an investment to show up in the answer, because I think it's going to be much, much cheaper than trying to bid on these ads and getting placed for the various prompt. So that's my thoughts on that. But Alex and Josh, curious to hear what you think.
I agree. I think the data is the main thing I'm excited for. If you're paying for ads, you got to have some data to back up like what you're paying for, how you're targeting, what the ROI is. And data is the big problem in this space right now. I haven't thought much further on it, but I like that it might be another tool in the toolkit. And I think for our agency, we're going to have an answer at the very least, and possibly think about like, should we do ChatGPT ads? Like, I don't know. It's very speculative territory, but I think the data is the thing I've been thinking about most with regards to that.
Josh?
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I think the marketplace around paid mentions right now, like paid organic mentions, is the wild wild west, especially as it relates to visibility. And what we want to do is try to solve at a pixel level, like what is this real estate worth? And I think with enough data we can get there. But what'll really help that model is understanding what CPC models look like for LLMs when we have that data. And then we'll be able to have some additional relative scale, especially, as the attribution data gets better in terms of what that looks like. I know Neil Patel published something that like one LLM impression. I don't know if you saw this research, Alex. I'm not we don't I don't know if we want to include this. I don't know how reliable his research is. Sometimes it's great, sometimes it's like and it's not always him doing the research, obviously, but yeah, like five to $6,000 is what one top of the funnel or top of the answer result is worth from an LLM was what he had. I'll send the study after. He had it on LinkedIn. Um, I think we'll actually get real data on that eventually, which I'm excited about with the ads model.
Nice. Cool. Well, hey, y'all, thanks for all this helpful insight. I think this will be really, really useful to everyone trying to kind of figure this out for themselves. Yeah, thanks so much. Everybody have a great day.
Thank you.
Man.